Hi, I'm Marissa, esthetician, artist, witch, and Branking, and I have questions in need of some answers. This item, the Scold's Bridle. What was it? Who wore it? Was it actually a punishment for witchcraft like they claim? Was it even used at all? And most importantly, can I serve absolute while wearing one? Let's attempt to answer these questions while I make my own yass-ified version of a Scold's Bridle on history, but make it Let's start our history lesson by doing one of my favorite things, being petty. A Scold's Bridle sits on display at the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. Cecil Williamson, founder of this museum, defined this item as a so-called Scold's Bridle, but in actual fact is reported to have come from Exeter Castle, where it is kept to clap on any female prisoner who gave way to shouting, swearing, or screaming abuse during the night hours. It is slightly uncomfortable to wear, for discomfort is the name of the game. The purpose of the bridle was to prevent the witch from shouting and cursing the town or persons in authority. I'm going to stop you right there. Where did you get this information from, bestie? Show me the receipts for this information, Cecil. Show me the receipts. Show them to me, Rachel. Rachel, please, show them to me, Rachel.
Show me to me, please. Send it to me, Rachel.
I'm not trying to start beef with a vaguely European man who may or may not be dead, but literally where did he get this information from? So many claims with so little historical evidence. So what did I find with my mediocre research skills, a year's worth of time, and a 60 milligram prescription for Adderall? Well, I'm so glad you asked. The Scold's Bridle, with similar variations being called branks in Scotland, are alleged to be inspired by a version from the Middle Ages, but documented use only goes from the 16th to the early 19th centuries in Europe. The term Scold's Bridle invites us to define both of these terms individually. So what is a scold? An insult given almost exclusively to women. To be called a scold was to imply antisocial or quarrelsome behavior. They were seen as being argumentative, loud, nosy, nagging, having loose morals. She was a messy bitch who lives for drama. Women who were deemed scolds were punished in a number of ways, branks actually being one of the less common in Europe. The official punishment for scolding was the ducking or cucking stool, which is coincidentally my nickname for your dad, and saw mostly women with the occasional man strapped to a wooden chair or commode and dunked repeatedly into flowing water, usually resulting in drowning. An account from Yorkshire Illustrated Monthly from May 1884 suggests potential reasons that a woman could get branked. She thus suffered for telling her mind to some petty tyrant in office, or speaking plainly of a wrongdoer, or for taking to task a lazy, perhaps drunken husband, suggesting that just about anything a woman said could be deemed as scolding. If you're a horse girly, you probably already know what a bridle is. Originally created to lead horses and mules, a bridle usually consists of the headstall, mouth bit, and reins. The mouth bit is the main inflictor of pain, rendering the animal compliant. This might make me sound stupid, but to be honest, I had no idea how bridles worked before this. I just kind of assumed that they were humane. I was wrong. The bit is forced against areas of the horse's mouth that are known to have an extremely high density of sensory receptors via a rider's pressure through the rein. The only possible experience for a horse of this pressure from the bit in its mouth is pain. Studies show bits cause many serious welfare consequences for horses. Injuries from bit use range from lesions in soft tissue and bruising to chronic impediment of a horse's ability to breathe or swallow normally. The bit induces such high levels of pain which, due to its intensity and location, can override all other pain a horse might experience, including fear. It's this attribute that makes bits the highly effective, albeit cruel, instrument of control that they are. That is so messed up. And it honestly makes me think, should we use these on women? The use of bridles for horses dates back millennia, and they're often mentioned in the Bible when referring to controlling animals, but also the sinfulness of the human tongue. Excuse me? This is also where the term bridle comes to mean to control or restrain.
Hello?
Hi. I thought you were gonna make one of those, though. Yeah, I'm getting to it. I just had to give some backstory so that they would know. It's just that I'm a visual person, okay?
Yeah.
And I don't know, the pictures aren't really doing a lot of justice for me.
I know.
I didn't really
I don't know,
have
I
a good
kinda
place
just need to, like,
stop.
visualize
I don't really what you're
know how to
talking
segue
about,
into that.
You know, like it'd be cool to have like a
This is the first video
visual
that I'm making,
representation,
and I just
wanted
guess.
to do a good job. Oh no, I get it, bestie. You know what? You're doing great.
Aw.
Love your work.
Aw, thank
It's
you.
just
Thanks.
I don't know. I just
I'm-
wanted to
I'm
make sure I was
getting
doing a
kinda
good
bored,
job. You know, I've been
like,
watching
with all
some
the quotes
deep
and
dives,
stuff,
and I
and
thought
it's,
it'd be
like, a
really
lot.
fun to make one.
I feel like,
I don't know, maybe we just need a little break. You know, maybe I could take over for a little and we can come back to you. I mean, I'm not trying to take your gig or anything. I don't know.
Am I that boring?
I don't know. I just like, damn, I was going to change the scenery like just for a little. I don't know. You said you were going to make one. I don't know, with all the yapping and stuff, and I feel like to like be surprised if anyone was still watching anyways.
And who even asked you?
I don't know, maybe like some transitions or some sound effects or like an explosion or something. I don't know.
Okay.
I have ADHD.
Okay.
Like,
Miss Editor-in-Chief.
What other unsolicited opinions do you have about my video? Quickly. Honestly, I feel like we should probably cut out the talking over each other bit. It's like kind of long and kind of cheesy.
Oh, shit.
Definitely overused.
You think?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to land, to be honest. It's kind of a lot.
Everyone's a critic these days.
Welcome to the part of the video where I actually start to make the thing that I've been talking about. To be honest, the majority of this footage is pretty boring to watch because it took me a very long time to complete this, so I will spare you the details and just give you the highlights. Now, the original version of the Scold's Bridle was made of iron, but unfortunately, I just ran out of iron ore and my anvil is in the shop for repairs, so we're just gonna have to substitute that for PVA foam today. If you can't grow your own PVA foam, store-bought is totally fine. I started by cutting a bunch of strips of PVA foam to create the forehead shape, kind of fitting it to my head as I went along. And then to strengthen the piece and also to allow me to bend the foam and have it keep its shape, I sandwiched a piece of wire between each layer of the foam. And after creating the forehead piece, I then moved on to the little pieces of foam that would go on each side of my nose. And I had a very hard time getting these even, so I decided to just attach them with Velcro. That way I could also move them and make them closer or farther apart depending on what angle I wanted to take pictures at. I then made another circle just a little bit wider for the piece that would cover my mouth and then attached them all together. The headpiece is pretty much completely attached in the back with Velcro, and I think it was an excellent decision to make. I'm definitely going to use Velcro in a lot more projects now. It allowed me to customize the fit of each individual piece and also take it off and put it on way easier. This whole project actually came about because I was inspired by this image. Bitch. Look at the hair. Look at the shimmer on the lid. I love it. It is so pretty. So here she is so far. How do you think she's looking? I don't know. I feel like I got pretty close. You may have noticed, though, that I've left a key feature of the Branks out of my design. The iron gag that would have held women's tongues down. Our bestie Cecil, quoted earlier, told us that Branks were slightly uncomfortable to wear. Typical of men to downplay women's suffering, though I've found that historical evidence would beg to differ with his statement. There are numerous versions of Scold's bridles, and the more common version did seem to have a flat, smooth mouth bit, but particularly gruesome versions did exist and would sometimes include one or multiple sets of spikes that would puncture the person's mouth if they were to move or talk or have the headpiece tugged on by the chain that was attached. Even the less brutal versions of Branks that only included that smooth mouth bit could still cause a great deal of pain and discomfort. We'll get into more of this in a bit, but if you're a recovering people pleaser or used to be an honors kid, you may already have some insight into the physical effects of wearing a gag. The most common type of Branks featured a mouth bit that would sit between 2 to 2.5 inches into the mouth. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but in your mouth, this depth is certainly enough to result in gagging, increased salivation, watery eyes, labored breathing, tooth and jaw aches. Not to mention that the iron that the bit was made out of would have probably supplied the wearer with a constant blood-like taste. Branks were also just very heavy and restrictive, potentially causing head, neck, and back aches. And that's not even taking into account the effects of the more gruesome versions of these gags. Like bridles for horses, the person holding the reins, or in this case the chain, would have a great deal of control in how much pain was inflicted upon the wearer. In more aggressive cases of wear, the mouth bit could permanently disfigure someone, causing tooth loss, scarring, and impaired speech. This would leave a permanent mark on the wearer, physically and symbolically, that would be a constant reminder of their wrongdoing and associated shame. These scars, along with the public humiliation that often accompanied this type of punishment, could and often would make the wearer a pariah to their community. Okay, that was a lot. How about we take a break with a quick vocabulary lesson? 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Today's lesson will be on vocabulary roughly from the same time period as the Scold's Bridle was used, the 16th through the 18th centuries. Feel free to take notes as you will be quizzed at the end of this segment. No bathroom breaks and only number 2 pencils, please. Let's begin. You and the girly pops are planning quite the festive outing to this lovely new tavern that just opened up down the road. Your new Pink Pony Pub. Elizabeth has been absolutely mullygrubs. Down in the dumps, later meaning a faked or exaggerated bad mood, since the recent perishing of her husband from cholera, a bacterial disease spread through contaminated water. Also very fun to say in a British accent. Cholera. And is desperately craving a GNO. Girls' night out. Also not a term from the 16th century. And yet, the very handsome lad who recently swiped right on your painted portrait has just informed you that he is in town and would love to meet. After much jollification, festivity, you spot that very same lad across the pub. He's an effeminate young man, a twiddlepoop, if you will. Was this just a 16th century slur? A twiddlepoop is essentially a femboy, although I just recently learned that it has a very different definition on Urban Dictionary. Wearing a very flattering codpiece and a single dangling earring. Your eyes meet momentarily before he begins to approach, clumsily weaving through the waves of pubgoers, attempting to keep his glass in his left hand upright, lest his posset, a hot drink of milk curdled with wine, beer, or brandy, if that ain't the whitest shit you've ever heard of, is spilled upon his buff jerkin, a buff leather jacket commonly worn by soldiers, also another nickname I have for your dad. Upon reaching you, an overwhelming stench of beer takes to your nose, and you note that his portrait painted him to be 6 foot tall, which he certainly is not. Still, hoping to engage in some innocent dalliance, flirting, you invite him to dance, but he shan't dance. He shan't ask a single question, and he was wearing these fugly breeches. It doth not matter, though, for he doth not have what it takes to pursue courtship with a dame like you. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of proud of that one. You decline his advances, though the lad does not concede. So he utters, "No head."
So no head?
By this comment, you are taken aback. What doth you take me for? A threepenny upright, you exclaim. I'd like to read the full definition that I found for this one. Threepenny upright. A retailer of love, who, for the sum mentioned, dispenses her favors standing against a wall. Also, incredible potential drag name. Hello? Though he persists. Finally, after his attempt at grabbing you by the rough collar, do you turn around and give him a duke kick and the tallywags? Balls. With the lad now doubled over in pain, you collect your group and hastily exit the pub. Though you make the journey back to the inn that evening, you are awoken the next morning by a knock at the door. Being branded as Scold, you are detained and shortly thereafter sentenced to the Branks. So, what now? I'm so sorry, British people. Well, after being branked, a town official may lead you through the streets by a chain and potentially affix you to the pillory, whipping post, or market cross as townspeople taunt, spit, urinate, and throw things. You would remain there as long as authorities deemed fit, but you could later be shunned or driven out of the town entirely as your name was permanently disgraced. Even with some accounts of this type of violent treatment, there were also sources that challenge these claims. Some insist that this type of punishment was actually rare, and that branks were more often used to aid in humiliation rather than actual physical punishment. It may have even just been simply carried or displayed publicly as a type of reminder or threat rather than actually worn. In support of this idea, Morgana McCabe for Internet Archaeology writes, during the 50 years from 1597 to 1648 that branking punishments were recorded in ecclesiastical cases in Stirling, branks were employed only 14 times but threatened 54 times. The infrequency of use and alternative sentences not involving wear suggests branking was not principally physically abusive but shaming. This is evident in the fact that even many years later a woman could still be insulted by calling her a branket bitch or whore. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, it's Branket Bitch. Wait a minute. Why were these only used on women? I know that men were saying some dumb shit. It's almost like society fears women's speech in particular. Hey. Hey. Hey you. What's up? Question. Why was it mainly women getting punished for their speech? Like, why did society fear women's speech in particular? If I tell you, are you gonna let me speak? Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Wait, didn't we write this bit out? So, why did society hate women's speech so much? Like every other deep dive on this godforsaken website, it starts with the printing press.
Wait, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
The printing press allowed this little book called the Bible to become super trendy. Forget book talk and blueberry milk nails. Christianity was the ultimate trend. In the Bible, Genesis, or the story of Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, spoke of the origin of humanity. Allegedly, God created paradise and let Adam and Eve live there in peace, but then he must have gotten bored like when you play The Sims for too long, so he decided to go full gaslight gatekeep girl boss on them and put this huge tree with a bunch of forbidden fruit, some like Animal Crossing ass looking apples or something, delish, but he said, don't eat those. They're not for you. Those are forbidden. They're not for you. They're forbidden. And then a snake, who's always depicted as being weirdly horny, convinced Eve to eat one, and that somehow caused the fall of humanity. Bit of an overreaction if you ask me. Somehow, people interpreted this story as a reason that Eve was inferior to Adam, because not only was Eve tricked by the horny snake into eating a forbidden fruit, but she also convinced Adam to eat one too. There's also the part about God taking a rib from Adam to create Eve, which was likely a mistranslation by a man on purpose. I apologize if I'm butchering the pronunciation of this, but the Hebrew word Selah is used some 40 times in the Old Testament, and only twice is it ever translated to mean rib, both times in the story of Eve's creation. Every other instance of this word being used in the Bible, the word is translated to mean side, more likely meaning half of Adam rather than just one measly rib. The period between 1595 and 1620 saw a sharp increase in the number of disputes and separations between aristocratic wives and their husbands. By the same token, however, the rise in women's dissatisfaction with the constraints of marriage also gave rise to the trope of the shrew. That is, an aggressively assertive woman who speaks her mind. Which leads us into our next topic, the shrew archetype. Shakespeare's play poked fun at many of the popular fictional works coming out at the time that all used the taming of the shrew plot trope. These storylines reflected society's ideals at the time and men's dissatisfaction with women's education and liberation. For my fellow public school besties who never had to read Shakespeare, a summary of the taming of the shrew plot trope is given by Louise Ovesfari. This plot structure typically involves a series of recurring motifs. A man, often young and penniless, marries a woman with shrewish or other negative qualities, laziness, etc., for her dowry or other reasons unrelated to love, despite another trying to talk him out of it. She may have a more docile but unavailable younger sister for contrast and/or an even more shrewish mother. The taming process begins immediately after the marriage and does not last long, sometimes only the wedding night itself. It involves denial of intimacy by the husband to the bride, and often also has several other features, including coercion, by violence, sleep deprivation and/or starvation, to induce submission and psychological manipulation, animal abuse, usually targeting cats in front of the wife. Capitulation by the shrew happens suddenly. She transforms into a model wife, and the couple lives happily ever after.
Huh? What? Oh. Okay.
Misogynistic plot tropes like the taming of the shrew reflect but also perpetuate men's domestication kink. Plants, bees, dogs, cats, camels, donkeys, horses, pigeons. If there's one thing that men love to do, it's make other things do all of their work for them. Once wild and free, animal behaviors are manipulated until they better suit a man's needs. Forget what they were doing before. Their new purpose is to serve man. Now, note the parallels being drawn here between the housewife and the domesticated animal. Both have ideal temperaments, docile and malleable. Both are expected to be of service whenever it is wanted or required, and both are given tasks that directly benefit man in order to make his life better and/or free up his own time. Kind of like your best herding dog running away, educated, liberated women distancing themselves from the home was seen as a threat to men's comfort. So how do we get these women back in line and back in the kitchen? Well, for that, we must tap into one of our most deeply rooted systems of survival, a basic part of human biology: shame.
Shame!
Shame is a very powerful deterrent, as it's essential to the survival of our species. Humans are notoriously social creatures and require others to survive. So a human, if abandoned, especially before modern eras, would surely meet a quick death. One theory relates shame to the emotion disgust. We may have evolved to be disgusted by things that could make us sick, like spoiled food or disease. This subconscious reaction to avoid something disgusting for our survival may also be why shame came about. If disgust is an emotion that we usually project out onto the world, then that same disgust projected inward would be considered shame. Shame is considered a disgust for the self, and it serves to prevent us from damaging our social relationships or motivating us to repair them. Though we don't have to worry about maintaining a solid hunting group too much anymore, being shunned was still considered a death sentence not too long ago. In the 1600s, during the time that the Scold's Bridle was used, it was a customary belief that the shameful actions of one person would affect the entire community, so punishments for those crimes were seen as a necessity. Especially for the non-rich and elite, Honor was one of the few and most important things that a person had, and shame could isolate them entirely, even getting them banished from their towns. The Scold's bridle may have been a physical punishment, but it also served to inflict shame upon its wearer. A similar punishment used around the same time period and also almost exclusively on women was the shame mask. These masks incorporated exaggerated animal-like features like pig noses, long tongues, and donkey ears. Others may have had large noses, eyes, ears, or mouths to indicate that the wearer was being nosy, spying, eavesdropping, or spreading gossip. Some of these shame masks also included a similar mouth bit to physically silence the wearer. In fact, most tools for public shaming use the same techniques to elicit the response: altering the physical appearance, calling attention to the individual or making them stand out in some way, and or taking some level of their autonomy away. The Scold's bridle and similar shame masks do all of these combined while also using animal-like imagery to further degrade the wearer. This is called Animalistic Dehumanization. From Animalistic Dehumanization as a Social Influence Strategy, Kim Saad refers to a psychology study done by Professor Nick Haslam. Haslam distinguishes two forms of dehumanization based on two different senses of humanness. On one hand, humanness may be considered as a set of features that are typical to humans. This sense of humanness leads to what Haslam calls mechanistic dehumanization, stripping people from their human nature and seeing them instead as machines incapable of warmth, emotion, and individuality. This is also known as objectification. On the other hand, humanness may be considered the set of unique human characteristics that defines the boundary separating humans from other animals. This second sense of humanness leads to what Haslam calls animalistic dehumanization, perceiving people as closer to animals, incapable of higher-level cognitive processes such as complex emotions or self-control. This type of dehumanization is often applied to marginalized groups to attempt to justify various forms of mistreatment. The recurrence throughout history of political propaganda using blatant animalized depictions of outgroups. In all cases, animalized dehumanization of the outgroup was used by political leaders to galvanize their own people and convince them that colonization and/or extermination of other humans was legitimized, given the outgroup's inferiority stemming from their animality. Okay, let's take a break and decompress. Let's check in on the Scold's bridle. I'm sure you were getting bored with all the yapping anyways. Let's get back to the Scold's bridle. So this type of foam sucks up a ton of paint, so I went in with a really cheap black acrylic and thinned it with a little bit of water. Then I went in after that was dry and added some metal scuff details with a brown paint as well. My assistant to the regional manager thought that this would be a fantastic time for an impromptu inspection. She does this literally every time that I'm crafting anything, and it does fully hinder whatever I'm doing, but I don't care because she's so cute. Look how cute she is. The next step is my favorite. Just gluing a bunch of shit to it. My original inspiration for this entire look was actually based off of the contents of an old junk box that I was given. If there's one thing you need to know about me, I fucking love just vintage junk. I think it's incredibly inspiring as an artist. Anyways, in this box, I found these really long, rusty nails, and then these incredibly sharp metal tacks. I think they were from the 40s based on the packaging, but I knew the second I saw them, I was like, I want those on my face. And here we are. I knew that these nails weren't going to be quite enough of a serve on their own, so I contrasted the dull, rusty tones of the nails with a more bright, cool-toned rhinestone, and then added some chain details that I ended up being obsessed with. Now, for some reason, I did not anticipate the tacks still being quite so sharp because of their age, and it was at this point that I've realized I've made a weapon. This is a weapon. It is far too dangerous for me to ever wear in public, like for Halloween or something, and I have to store it at the very top of my cabinet because if you bump into it at basically any angle, it will cut you. It's so chaotic and I love it. Are you ready to see the finished product? Okay. Here she is. Cue some kind of dramatic montage, maybe. Now, is it giving historical accuracy? Not entirely. But is it giving? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Looking at that for too long does kind of freak me out a little, though. And that one doesn't even have the mouth bit. I just cannot believe that something like that used to be legal. Well, actually, it wasn't technically legal. How did people use it then? Well, many punishments were left up to local Christian authorities, like town councils, barony courts or kirk sessions, which are like local church courts. They took it upon themselves to dole out punishments however they saw fit. And no, there was no diversity among the group of people in charge. Vicky Duncan, in a piece for the National Trust for Scotland, writes, "These institutions were set up by men. It was men who sat on the sessions, and it was men who passed the judgments." Who would have guessed? It was all straight white men. It goes without saying that the patriarchy and Christianity go hand in hand. No homo, though. And they perpetuate the systems of the other. Tying back to men's domestication kink, this is where they learned it. There always has to be a power dynamic at play. There always has to be someone on top. For some reason, we can't just coexist as equals. This power dynamic affects everyone around us, including animals, and places them at the very bottom. And that is why Christianity relates women to animals. Now, of course, we can't prove that animals are truly inferior to humans, but humans have believed so for millennia. This idea that animals must be controlled or dominated by man is often alluded to in the Bible, as is the inherent unpredictability and sinfulness of women, like in Genesis. In the same way that a bridle keeps a horse in line, it might just do the same for a woman. Morgana McCabe theorizes that the invention of the Scold's bridle was due to a literal interpretation of the Bible. They may have been dehumanizing or domesticating, as is suggested by Psalm 32. "Be ye not as the horse or as the mule, which have no understanding, whose mouth must be held in with bit and bridle, lest they come near unto thee." Much is made of the connection between women and horses as objects to be managed and ridden under male dominion. Even here, animalistic dehumanization is at play, aligning the act of sinning with being undisciplined, uncontrollable, inferior, inhuman. By giving into your desires, you are no better than an animal, and for that, you should be ashamed. Sin becomes the ultimate shame, and shame the ultimate tool for control. Obviously, we can see how associating someone with an animal creates that feeling of inferiority. And similarly to the Scold's bridle, BDSM, stay with me here, uses the same tools and techniques to elicit the response of shame. Think Nikita Dragon at the VMAs. Collars, leashes, muzzles, bridles, cages. All commonly used on animals, but all very degrading when used on humans. Except some of them like it, sometimes, I guess. You may be asking yourself, why is this relevant? Well, if you can't tell, I am trying to blame the Christian church for the existence of bondage and furries, so stay with me, okay? But Christianity wasn't always like this. As we know, Jesus loved the prostitutes. So what changed? I could do an entire 2-hour video on this subject alone. I think it's fascinating. However, I don't have a lot of personal experience with the church, and this video, titled Christianity's Obsession with Sex, does a much better job than I could ever hope to do. So I'll be referencing a little bit of the video here, and I'll leave the link for it in the description. Anyways, now on to my best attempt at getting an apostle canceled. I found it so interesting that in his lecture, Hamer mentions that Jesus himself actually had very little to say about sex in his Gospels, which makes sense as he was notoriously geeking with the prostitutes. And many of the rules created later in Scripture can actually be traced back to this one messy bitch, fucking Apostle Paul.
I'm a messy bitch who lives for drama.
Apostle Paul was the first Christian whose writings survived, and were later just canonized as Scripture. Before St. Paul's fanfic dropped, the only real mention of sex in Jesus' Gospels promoted the general idea of love over lust and discouraged divorce, though only prohibited remarrying after divorce. It was then revised by Matthew, a whole ass different guy, who added a sexual immorality exemption, allowing divorce if you were cheated on by your partner. Why? Probably for the benefit of some man. Anyways, back to this menace. Apostle Paul, also called St. Paul the Hermit, last name the Hermit, first name St. Paul, he is commonly considered to be the first monk, and did many of the things that you think of when you think of a monk. He isolated himself from society, fasted, practiced celibacy, didn't drink alcohol. He is also one of the main authors of the fan base, having estimated to have written anywhere between 7 to 14 of the books in the New Testament series. However, Miss Paulina wasn't even one of the original 12 dolls. In fact, he never met Jesus at all. He didn't even convert to Christianity until 4 to 7 years after Jesus' crucifixion. Like, he never even met this man, and he became so obsessed with him that he locked himself in his ancient bedroom and wrote potentially thousands of pages of fan fiction. That is fangirl behavior. Like, I feel like St. Paul would have had a Tumblr back in the day called Jesus' Left Sandal or something.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Anyways, this flop was also the first one to insert ideas about celibacy and homophobia into the lore. In 1 Corinthians 7, 8, 9, 25 through... How the fuck are you supposed to say that? He speaks on virginity. Now, concerning virgins, I have no command of the Lord, but I give my opinion as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. I think that, in view of the impending crisis, it is good for you to remain as you are. In Christianity's obsession with sex, Hamer goes on to speculate that St. Paul's ideas about celibacy might have been linked with the fact that he thought the fucking world was going to end. Hence the impending crisis he mentions, telling virgins to stay as they are, not because sex was bad, but because procreation wouldn't matter if everyone was going to die anyway. Also, St. Paul literally says that he doesn't have a command from the Lord, that this is just his opinion.
That's my opinion!
He literally says, in my opinion. Bitch, nobody asked you. Me trying to fight a man that's been dead for thousands of years. And I'll do it again. He's literally putting words into God's mouth that she never said, and now we're just supposed to consider all of his fanfiction as canon to the lore? But here's the real tea. St. Paul spent much of his time trying to understand the origins of homosexuality, specifically the homosexuality of the ancient Greeks, which are notoriously queer-coded, and insisted that they were turned gay by staring at all of the sexy statues of naked men that they had lying around. But if no naked men statues around today, why boys still like boys? St. Paul blamed the Mosaic law itself in Romans. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, "You shall not covet." But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Translation? If you never told me that it wasn't okay to be gay, I would have never known that I was gay. This man literally admitted to simping hard as fuck in his scripture. St. Paul had various musings and reflections on same-sex attraction in his lifetime, which has led various scholars to come to the conclusion that, because he was being so horny on Maine, he was probably secretly masked for mask. Bishop John Shelby Spong called St. Paul, a rigidly controlled gay male, I believe, taught the Christian church what the love of God means. St. Paul is also credited with writing a lot of the more misogynistic scripture in the fandom. Rumor has it that St. Paul had a beard. No, the other type of beard. And if he was actually gay, being married to a woman could cause him to resent her presence potentially being a constant reminder of his temptation and sinfulness. In his scripture, he claims that because of the abundance of revelations that he had received from God, a messenger of Satan sent him a thorn in the flesh to keep him from being conceited. There are tons of theories as to what this thorn in the flesh might have been. Maybe an illness, an injury, religious opposition, though some theories point to it being his wife, or maybe the divorce from his wife. If he did resent his wife, whether it was because of his sexuality or just the fact that they had gotten divorced, it could absolutely manifest as a general hatred toward women and greatly influence his scripture. Even the term thorn in the flesh has evolved into the expression thorn in my side, which is used almost exclusively to talk about another person causing you some kind of grief. An article from Renner.org states, the word thorn is the Greek word scolops, a word used to describe a dangerously sharp spiked instrument or tool. However, this word was also used to describe the stake on which an enemy's head was stuck after being decapitated. People have gone so far in their imaginations as to assert that Paul suffered from malaria, epilepsy, eye disease, club feet, or a hunched back. There is nothing in any New Testament scripture to back up such speculations. One thing is clear, however. Satan wanted Paul's head on a stake. Ironically, Satan ended up getting what he wanted in the end because St. Paul allegedly died a martyr, executed by beheading.
So no head?
Though his angsty scripture lives on in our churches, politics, systems of oppression, and probably to his dismay, in the bedroom, I'm sure St. Paulina would be absolutely mortified to learn that the shameful nature of his scripture might have actually inspired the likes of dominatrixes, sexy nun costumes, humiliation kinks, BDSM, cucks, the furries. Religious trauma is really an endless well of taboo inspiration. Surprise! The Bible doesn't pass the Bechtel test. In an article titled Women Less Than 15% of Bible Characters, Aaron Kane states, women of importance in the Bible were mostly sex workers, queens, and barren women in need of children. It's giving Madonna whore complex. These aren't exactly kid-friendly stories, and they are not very diverse stories either. It is difficult to tell stories when the characters are unnamed, as so many scriptural women are. Including the Apocrypha, there are more than 600 unnamed women in the Bible. Many women are identified only in relation to men, wife of, daughter of, sister of, etc. If the woman does have a name, she often shares it with another biblical woman. This is true on 27 occasions. Named or unnamed, great deals of these women were also conniving and deceitful in their stories, whether heroes or villains. Tamar, Judith, Jezebel, Rahab, Salome, just to name a few. But only 188 to 205 of the women have names, depending on what Bible you're reading. Compare that to the 1,181 named men, and women are less than 15% of the named characters. This is a conservative estimate, as it includes women in the Apocrypha. Ignoring women's stories and names has pervaded our religious and secular histories for centuries and continues today. Misogyny is so deeply woven into this ideology that I truly don't think it could exist without it. Jezebel, Mary Magdalene, Cleopatra, Marilyn Monroe, the male gaze turns complex and capable women into sexualized caricatures of themselves. If she's educated, she's perceived as manipulative and dangerous. And if she's uneducated, she's seen as inferior and irrelevant. And this brings us right back to why men fear women becoming educated. Is a woman smarter than me? Must be a witch. The witch trials are seen as a time when the fear of women was so strong that they were actively sought out and accused of witchcraft, both by people who actually believed in witchcraft and also those just looking for an excuse to rid their community of someone they didn't like. Though it's quite likely that misogynistic rhetoric from the Bible had influence here as well, along with a potential fear of change coming from the more conservative members of society. The factors that led to the 1692 Salem witchcraft outbreak were indeed complex. Much of the conflict fueling the trials originated in tensions between a traditional Puritan lifestyle based on piety and subsistence farming, and an increasingly worldly capitalist outlook. Some Puritans complained of declension, a waning of godly ideals beginning in the 1630s when Massachusetts Bay was settled. Please do not let the TikTok tradwives get a hold of the word declension. Friction between town and village had also developed over governance. Villagers resented paying taxes to maintain a distant town church and wanted independence. The accusations may have also reflected tension between neighbors. Some scholars blame them on the fantasies and hysteria of children and possibly ergotism, a form of poisoning from a potentially hallucination-causing fungus that grows on rye, and an encephalitis epidemic. Gender also seemed to be significant. Were propertied women the victims of envious men? Many of these tragic stories in our history seem to have a similar theme. Religious conservatism, fueled by some fear of change or opposition, hitting its breaking point, its members eventually lashing out in defense. Societal values tend to ebb and flow throughout history. Humanity leans one way, becomes bored or dissatisfied, and then turns to the other. We see this in everything from politics to fashion trends. To me, the Salem witch trials echoes some of the same sentiments that led to the fall of the Roman Empire, resulting in the Dark Ages, the events leading up to World War II, the events leading up to World War III. Oh, sorry, no spoilers, sorry. My point is, progressives be progressing, and conservatives be hyperfixating on a marginalized group of people that they can demonize and use as an excuse to drag humanity backward for the sake of their own money and power. Although at least in America it seems that politics have been shifting further right for decades, and a lot of people feel that the left doesn't even properly represent the half of the population it's supposed to anymore, and currently in 2025 it seems the pendulum is swinging back to the right again, except the pendulum is attached to a very crooked ceiling joist that wasn't anywhere near center to begin with. That analogy was for the U-Haul lesbians. And if we don't or can't look back into the past to see how they've overcome these problems before, women could be back to wearing the Scold's bridle sooner than we think. I mean, the last time one was used was only a few hundred years ago, which is nothing compared to the age of the majority of the people running America right now. You cannot convince me that Elon Musk is not 1,000 years old. Like, tell me you couldn't see him slaying as a sexually repressed Puritan, tripping absolute balls on poison mushroom bread and trying to perform exorcisms on teenage girls. He's probably doing that right now. The Scold's bridle was used at the same time that the witch trials occurred, but the direct association between the two that TV and movies tend to make is just not historically accurate. It does appear, though, that the number of Branking punishments during this time did increase, but we don't really have any proof that they were used specifically on those accused of witchcraft. Use of the Branks went out of use in Stirling just 5 years before the last witch execution in Scotland, in 1727. The vast majority of those Branking cases, however, were not connected with witchcraft accusations, but with normal societal offenses, such as slander and scolding. The temporal correlation between the witch hunts and increased, seemingly unrelated use of the Branks in Stirling suggests more subtle aspects of the deep fears about the dangerous, wild, and sinful nature of women that underlay witch beliefs. So the witch trials ended, and so did use of the Branks, right? Well, not exactly. The obsolescence of the Scold's bridle. Uses dwindled over time as Branks became outlawed, even though they weren't technically legal in the first place, and the punishment was deemed barbaric. But dwindle they did, as they could still be seen as late as the 19th century in workhouses to discipline unruly women and alcoholics. Have the Kardashians heard about this? This feels like it could be the next level after flat tummy tea, you know what I mean? Like, for the girlies that are super serious. Like Medieval Ozempic. Medieval Ozempic, that would be a sick band name. Interestingly, the crime of being a scold wasn't dropped from the statute books in Britain until 1963. So you probably won't have to worry about getting called a scold anytime soon, but don't worry, there is a modern day equivalent. A modern day equivalent to scolding with the same bad reputation and sexist connotation to women specifically, gossiping. A behavior that all humans engage in that is thought to be evolutionarily beneficial and may be responsible for our survival. Gossiping is very effective at holding people accountable for their actions, encouraging better behavior in general, forming closer social circles, and for women, allowing information about men with dangerous behaviors to be efficiently spread throughout the group so that those men may be outed and avoided. Okay, before we check in to see the final makeup look with the Scold's Bridle on, we need to discuss just that. Makeup. Women's beauty as social currency. It is no coincidence that most punishments for women use their appearance against them to make them feel ashamed. For much of history, women couldn't earn money or own property, so their survival relied on finding a man to financially support them. Thus, attractiveness became key to survival. Alongside the very obvious and tangible ways that women are being oppressed, especially under the current fascist regime, there are also the more subtle ways, like our beauty standards. Men can go to weddings unshaven in jeans, and yet I'm expected to be hairless from head to toe and then glue tiny little hairs on my eyelashes and put on 4-inch heels. Why? For what? I've probably lost years of my life, literally, sitting in front of a mirror, when I could have been already at the party, already with my friends, already having fun. One study found that the average amount of time a woman spends working on her appearance every day is 55 minutes, which honestly seems very low to me. But even then, that's 335 hours a year. That's a 2-week vacation. A year. That means over the course of their lifetime, if a woman started wearing makeup around 14 and lived to the average age of 80, they would spend 22,110 hours on their appearance. 2.5 years. And that is on the very low end. A huge reason for this, I think, is historically, a woman's appearance has always held much more weight when defining their worth than a man's does. The Scold's Bridle and shame masks take advantage of this very fact in order to inflict shame upon the women who wear them. They weaponize the mere experience of being seen. Feminine presenting people have had their worth be defined by how attractive they are to men for as long as men have been in control. So what do? Normally, this is the part in a video essay where I'm supposed to tell you how we might fix all this, give you a glimmer of hope, and to be honest, I don't have much. Especially in the younger generations, it seems like women on average are becoming more liberal and men more conservative. The alpha male podcasts and toxic red pill rhetoric online regurgitates a very poorly disguised version of the same Christian values that have been menacing society since the beginning. They teach men that they inherently deserve respect and they need to establish dominance in order to feel some sense of worth. They're told to push down any emotions or traits that might be considered feminine because femininity is considered inferiority. These thought patterns lead to emotionally underdeveloped men that are isolated and angry and surely have resulted in the male loneliness epidemic. The male loneliness epidemic. Wait, I actually just realized that I don't care. Go to therapy. Moving on. The Scold's Bridle, like a horse's bridle, surrounds the head and restricts its movements. An iron gag presses the tongue down, and a chain makes the victim defenseless against their oppressors. This item, designed by the church for its own women, was used to keep them silent, to keep them obedient. Much of the information online about this item might lead you to believe that they were used on witches, only one small part of history, but there were no real witches, just women who dared to speak up or stand out, to be themselves. The reality is that we still feel the gravity of the Scold's Bridle every day in the modern world. Be ye not as the horse or as the mule, which have no understanding, whose mouth must be held in with bit and bridle, lest they come near unto thee, and whose speech could be more dangerous than the successor of the one responsible for humanity's original sin, Eve. Man tried to paint Eve as inconsequential, made from the single rib of a man, and yet she is still so powerful, as she was destined to doom us all. All of humanity's suffering so easily placed on the backs of those who are made to suffer most. Christianity teaches men that uneducated women are inferior and irrelevant, but educated women are manipulative and dangerous. Their thoughts contradict as they are taught to simultaneously desire and dislike us. Wild horses and wild women are of no use to these men. Domestication may be violent, but it may be quieter, more sinister. After some time, she begins to call the stable her home. This is where she belongs, he tells her. She was born to submit. Her wild tendencies are now softened by neglect, as man is not always kind. She always gives more than she gets in return. And every so often, her eyes will catch the light of the sun, and she'll think of what might it feel like to be free. This is when she becomes a threat. So on the day that men feared most, when women found books and community and began to loosen the locks on their stable doors, men found another way to keep them docile. These women were branded as scolds, a shameful title that no one held proudly. They were gossipers, tattletales, and nags. Even the most headstrong woman could be shamed into submission. The scold's bridle was a feral punishment for a woman acting uncivilized. To wear the bridle was to be no better than a workhorse, to have no more humanity than a mule. A public reprimand would act as a reminder to every woman watching. This is what will happen if you fall out of line. Women were turned into spectacles and their appearance was weaponized against them. Being perceived became the punishment. And when shame was still not enough, these men of God sharpened the bridle further, because a woman could not speak up without a tongue, without teeth. God was a woman. God was a woman until Christians lit fire to the old religion, stamping out as much as they could manage, and stealing for themselves what little remained in the ashes. This torture device invites us to look into the past like a mirror. It asks us to open our eyes and see clearly where we came from, what values we have, what morals we hold. It reminds us that we are still products of our past. The scold's bridle has simply become invisible, but it is still being held over our heads. The term scold has just been replaced with nag, and gossip, and bitch. Its sentiment lays the very foundation of suppression that we face today. To humiliate a woman, we relate shame to her appearance. But to humiliate a man, we relate him to a woman. My inspiration for this piece was the domestication of women, the divine feminine under the foot of the patriarchy. The feminine has a divine relation to the wild. They are intrinsically linked to nature in a way that the masculine may never understand. Our menstrual cycles are linked with the phases of the moon, our hormone levels tied to the changing seasons. Women are the source of creation, the true bearers of pain, the literal portal between death and life. The feminine is the creator, the God. Biblical patriarchy attempts to deny our true nature. It burns women's history and rewrites its own in the ashes. It strips the divine feminine of her power, and then of her clothes, her value, her history, her name, erased by power-hungry men preaching misinterpretations of misinterpretations. It stands behind stories so weak, so convoluted, so contradictory. And yet, this too somehow gives it power. It's malleable. It may be anything for anyone, a guide for obedience, a tool for fear, a weapon for war. It tells you not to ask questions, just to listen, just to obey. It objectifies the very mother of its own creation. Christianity's very ideals would have seen its own divine feminine, the Virgin Mary, the mother of their Jesus. Branded a blanket bitch. Thank you so much for watching. This was my first ever YouTube video, and it was really fun to make and also a fucking nightmare. I have had to film this entire video and edit it 3 times because I don't know how to use editing software and microphones, but I am still new, so I don't really have a posting schedule yet. So if you would ever like to see anything from me ever again, you can subscribe if you want. There's no pressure. It's free, and you can always change your mind if you decide that I'm annoying later or whatever. Like this if you want, but also no pressure. Should I reverse psychology you? Don't like this video. And don't leave a comment telling me how pretty I am, because I do like the attention and I do still require validation. I hope you have a wonderful day and be mean to a man today for me. Okay, love you, bye.